Penn State wraps a bow around the 2023 recruiting class with Chimdi Ono's commitment, 4-star offensive lineman. And once again, Tim Maiden, Marty Leap from BlackStars.com. We're live here to talk about all things Penn State recruiting, transfer portal, because there's been a lot of transfer portal news since we last did this show a month ago, right after the Rose Bowl. And we'll also talk a little bit about the offseason hype train that just continues to barrel down the tracks. And since Penn State is having one of those seasons in basketball where they're squarely on the NCAA tournament bubble, we'll even dive into some hoops talk later on in the show. But as I mentioned right beforehand, Chimdi Ono, 4-star offensive lineman out of, I believe it's Virginia.
Maryland. Baltimore.
Baltimore, yes, Dundalk, Maryland, Baltimore area. 6'5", 270-pound offensive tackle, 4-star kid, number 5 rated recruit in the state of Maryland. I believe he was originally committed to Old Dominion and then decommitted once he started blowing up late. And so I'm sure Ricky Ronnie probably put in a good word for his old boss at Penn State. And, of course, he did make a visit up there, and the staff really made a great enough impression on him to select the Nittany Lions earlier today. But, Marty, obviously this is a great way to top off what's been a pretty solid 2023 class. You've talked, I know, ad nauseum before about the importance of stacking on top of the 22 class. And it seems like that's precisely what they've done here with 2023's class.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that this is the best back-to-back classes James Franklin has signed. That 22 class, it was right there with the 2018 class, depending on, being where it's ranked and points and all that sort of thing. They're pretty neck and neck, but I give that 22 class an edge because, again, no offense, and this may sound odd because the guy's going to be a first-round pick, but when the quarterback in your class is Will Levis as opposed to Drew Aller, there's a big difference there, in my opinion. So to follow up a class of that caliber with this 23 class is just really good. And, the add Chimdi Ono, that's a big-time addition. The kid's going to be a year or two project, but there's a super high ceiling there at offensive tackle, a true offensive tackle. And I did see that if you go off of the 247 Sports Composite score, Penn State's offensive line class was the best in the Big Ten and the second best in the country behind Alabama. And, where are you going to win football games? You win it in the trenches. It doesn't matter if it's Pop Warner football, high school, college, NFL, it starts in the trenches. So to see Penn State put together that good of an offensive line class is great to see. And it's great to see, recruiting-wise, them building on the momentum that the offensive line built on the field this year with the season that Phil Troutwine's group had.
For sure. And you had me thinking, I think one thing that really prevented, when we talked about how this is going to be the most hyped off season probably since 2017, I think the biggest difference between this going into this upcoming season and that season is the offensive line. I think it's light years better from what it was in 17. And I'm not saying it was bad in 17, but there wasn't as much, definitely there was as much depth. They didn't seem to get as much push in the run game as, this offensive line seems to be doing. And the thing is, you lose one or two guys, like they lost Ryan Bates, I remember, during, infamous game against Ohio State, and that was enough to just, send that whole house of cards tumbling down the rest of the game. And, but in this case, you had a couple of guys, I think you had 2 or 3 starters get hurt, and they were able to plug in and not just be serviceable, but still be able to pass protect and open up holes for Nick Singleton and Katron Allen to run through. So, yeah, I think when you mention how critical it is to be stocking up in the trenches, this is a very welcoming sign, a very positive sign, one that gives you a lot of hope for these next couple years going forward. As you know, this coming year, and probably 2024, those seem like the years for Penn State to strike and try to claim status as the kings of the Big Ten. So very neat to see. But of course, class in general, its total composite rank on 24/7 is 13th. And just to tell you how tight things are between 10 and 13, like Notre Dame is only about 4 points ahead of them. And then Clemson is 3 points ahead of them. And then USC was literally 0.72 points ahead of them in the composite rankings. So, I mean, it is like on the cusp of being a composite top 10 class, having back-to-back top 10 classes. So I know, it's a very solid top 15 class. And I know we were just talking about offensive linemen. We also got Javon Williams, Alex Birchmeyer, probably the two highest rated kids in the class, actually, according to 24/7. And then you even got some kids like, let's see, I guess they had 3 offensive linemen, but
that 3 coming into the day, Ono made a 4.
Anthony Donko
was the other one, yeah.
I swore there was more than just 3 linemen that included Chimdy. So, yeah, so 4 solid offensive linemen joining this class. And of course, you also got studs like Tony Rojas, who should help make linebacker U what it's been known for with his athleticism. And then I don't know about you, Marty. I'm really excited to see some of these secondary players like Elliott Washington, King Mack, Zion Tracy, Takari Nelson. It looks like they should continue to be fielding some very athletic secondaries that can break up passes, get picks, and also just hone in and just deliver some nasty hits on ball carriers or people who make the catch.
Yeah, absolutely. This secondary class is just phenomenal. I mean, I think the job Anthony Poindexter has done his 2 years in Happy Valley now as safety coach cannot be overlooked. I think the job Terry Smith continues to do as cornerbacks coach and as defensive recruiting coordinator is always overlooked and has been since he was hired by James Franklin. Elliott Washington might be my favorite player in this entire class. I think he's a kid who can play early at corner. I think he definitely is going to make a huge impact next year on special teams. The kid, I mean, when he flipped from Penn State from Alabama to Penn State, excuse me, Alabama didn't necessarily fight to keep him in the class per se, but Alabama wasn't pushing him out either. When you're Alabama, you know you're going to be able to find someone to replace a kid who's not, a surefire top 50 5-star kind of guy. But it's not like Alabama was processing the kid. Nick Saban would have gladly still taken Elliott Washington had he wanted to still sign with the Crimson Tide. So obviously that's saying something. You mentioned Dakari Nelson. Long term, does he end up at the same linebacker? It's a real possibility. But with his size and athleticism, if he can stick at safety, that's the elite kind of size, speed, athleticism trio that you don't get a lot of at safety. And King Mack from Florida, from National Powerhouse St. Thomas Aquinas, to me, kids like that, it's a big deal, not just because of their talent, but playing at a place like St. Thomas Aquinas, you're playing the best competition in the country. So you come into college very battle-tested. I mean, I don't think it's an overstatement to say St. Thomas Aquinas probably has a better strength and conditioning program and off-season program than some, like lower end FCS Division II, Division III schools. Like the kid is going to adjust to college football very easily. And then you throw in the fact he's uber talented. I think one of my favorite things too about this class, you look at what they recruited so well in 2022. We talked about that class from 6th in the country. It was Drew Alar. It was Nick Singleton. It was Katron Allen, guys we all saw this year. It was the tight ends with Jerry Cross, who, a high ceiling there. You look at wide receiver, Caden Saunders and Omari Evans and Anthony Ivy. The offensive line has already produced 2 studs in Drew Shelton and Vega Ione. This year's class is very defensive heavy, and it complements that class last year really well. You know, you look at this year's class, and if there's anything you're going to put a knock on, other than maybe the quarterback position, is that you would have liked to see a little bit more of a true edge rusher, but you're coming off a class in which you brought on Denai Dennis Sutton, who was a 5-star pass rusher. And, you know, this year in limited actions, year went on, started to show why. You're coming off a class in which you brought Abdul Carter, who next year at this time, we might be talking about Abdul Carter as the best pass rusher in the country. So again, it complements last year's class so well. And that's how you truly stack classes. You don't just load up on talent. You complement the previous year's class, which Penn State certainly did this year. Like I said, in my opinion, this is the best back-to-back classes that James Franklin has signed. And I think it's only going to continue to contribute to, as you kind of touched on earlier, that window, that 2023, 2024 window that I think everyone at Happy Valley and Penn State fans all over are talking about. This class is only going to help continue to contribute to that window. Because I mean, I don't think you're going to see as many guys play right away as you did this year. Because Penn State, I think, burned like 10 or 11 red shirts this year. But you expect that when you sign the number 5, number 6 class in the country like they did. Again, this 23 class, I don't think you see as many guys play right away. But I mean, between Elliott Washington, a King Mack, perhaps a Tony Rojas, I think there are a handful of guys there who can make an impact right away this fall. Andrew Rappleyea, another kid I love in this class. I'll get into him more later, but I think Rappleyea could be a future All-American at tight end. Just there's so much talent in this class, and
that's a guy I was thinking of in my, for
like
offense.
I think I mean, it's a lazy comparison because he's a prep kid from Massachusetts.
Let's just talk Rappleyea while we're at it. I think
Yeah.
he could be a real stud out of this class.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a lazy comparison because he's a prep kid from Massachusetts, but man, it's Pat Fryermuth 2.0, in my opinion. He's big, he's physical, he's very athletic, he's got soft hands.
Not mind that.
Yeah, he's gonna maul you in run blocking and be a threat in the pass game. And I think he's a kid who comes in ready to play day one, even with Penn State still returning a lot of talent at tight end, even with Brenton Strange going pro. But yeah, in my opinion, I think we might look back on this class 4 or 5 years down the road and say Rappleyea was the best player in it. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
I could very much see if he's Pat Fryermuth 2.0, I could very well see that. But time will tell. Another, I guess, sticking to the offense in this class. I know it's a little bit of slim pickings, but I'm intrigued by the running back haul of London Montgomery and Cam Wallace. London Montgomery, I remember James Franklin, and I'm paraphrasing, when they had their draft day thing they always do on the early signing period, when they announced him and Franklin's FaceTiming with him, he said something like along the lines of basically calling him a hidden gem. People aren't aware of how great he is. And that's because he tore his ACL, didn't miss his entire senior year of high school football. And so that's kind of had people sort of writing him off or just, sort of ignoring, because they figure he's not, may not be able to play his freshman year, or he'll just be a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of development. But he's a guy that I think obviously they won't need to rely on him next year. But you're thinking maybe by the time, this time next year, he's one of those guys that you hear about who's made progress in the weight room and his conditioning, and sounds like a guy who's poised to be the starter, to be the man once Singleton and Allen are both gone. And then you got Cam Wallace, who is known for being a speedster. Is one of those guys like you have no problem taking him just for his speed alone. You try to bulk him up in the weight room some, and see if he can turn him into another Journey Brown. That's essentially what Journey Brown was when he came to Penn State. He was like this 3-star kid, super fast, just needed to develop that football body, which he eventually did. And sadly, his career was cut short due to a heart condition. I have no doubt if he had been able to, if it weren't for his condition, he'd probably be making millions in the NFL right now. But that's the comparison I would make with Cam Wallace. It could potentially be another Journey Brown down the line. Marty, is there any, besides Andrew Rappa, is there any other offensive kid in this class that you're intrigued with, or you're curious to see how they end up doing during a time?
I mean, Cam Wallace definitely a kid I like too. With that speed, it's intriguing. There's some size concerns there. Like you said, he's going to need to get in the strength and conditioning program. He's going to need to add some size and bulk up. But if he can do that and keep his speed, that becomes very intriguing very quickly, even in the return game. The offensive line, just to circle back to it, I think that Javen Williams, Alex Birchmeier duo could just be a lot of fun. I mean, Birchmeier is nasty. He's mean. He's physical. He's a state champion wrestler. He's going to maul kids in the trenches. If you haven't watched Javen Williams' film, do yourself a favor and go do it. The kid's the same way. Played a while missing here in Pennsylvania. So played in AAA football. So, he didn't exactly – it's not like he was playing against a bunch of small schools either. He was out there bossing kids around. And both of them, their footwork is very impressive, especially Williams for his size. One of the guy in offense I want to touch on though also, wide receiver Carmelo Taylor. This class things definitely did not go as they had hoped at wide receiver. Probably played a big role in why Taylor Stubblefield was let go. But Taylor brings a lot of speed to the wide receiver room, and that's something the room doesn't necessarily have right now outside of Amari Evans and maybe Caden Saunders. You don't have a lot of that game-breaking, take the top off the defense kind of speed, and Carmelo Taylor could bring that. Again, very similar to Wallace in that he's a kid who's going to need the strength and conditioning program. I think right now he's listed at 5'11", 160, so that means he's probably like 5'10", 150. He's going to need to add to that, but if he can add to that frame, carry the weight, and maintain his speed, you could have a pretty good outside weapon on your hands in a couple of years in Carmelo Taylor.
Absolutely. Speaking of receivers who can take the top off defenses, it's a nice little segue into transfer portal talk. As mentioned before, since we last did this show, Penn State's picked up a handful of guys out of the transfer portal who I think should be immediate contributors. Most notable of all, Dante Cephas out of Kent State. Penn Hills kid, a Pittsburgh kid. He was barely a 3-star recruit out of high school, which is why he didn't get any real Power 5 offers, but he proved himself at Kent State in Sean Lewis's offense, who's since departed to be Deion Sanders' offensive coordinator at Colorado. And now he comes back to his home state to be a key weapon in the Nittany Lions passing attack. Unfortunately, he's still finishing up his degree at Kent State for the spring, so he will not be able to catch a glimpse of him in the blue-white game. He will enroll sometime around probably first summer session in May, I would guess. And obviously, huge addition there. Also get Malik McLean out of Florida State, who he had his moments, just seemed to lack issues of consistency, but he's a guy who's certainly capable of putting together in terms of he's a taller body, so he's good on deep balls, or just if you're close to the end zone and just want to throw something up for him to grab, he's ideal for that. So definitely a welcome addition to the portal. And Storm Duck, cornerback out of UNC, who's by all means, that's a tough loss for the Tar Heels, but huge game for the Nittany Lions. He's a guy who's going to push for a starting job opposite of Kalen King in the cornerback position. So be fun to see him. And On an interesting note, I believe it was during our show last time when you had the breaking news of Devin Carter committing out of the portal from North Carolina State to Penn State. Turns out that was a bit premature. Devin Carter apparently I guess just wanted a little more NIL money up front, and West Virginia turns out was willing to give that to him. So he ended up choosing the Mountaineers instead. But who does Penn State play to begin next season? That's right, folks, West Virginia. And who picked off a pass intended for Devin Carter last year when NC State was playing UNC? You guessed it, Storm Duck. So we may perhaps see history repeat itself, but with different uniforms this time when Penn State and West Virginia open up in about 7 months from now. And then last but not least, you got Riley Thompson, punter out of Florida Atlantic. One of those rugby style Aussie punters who just have been churning in for the college football recruiting pipeline. But it's a nice person to throw in. It's a 1-year rental, basically. It's on his last year of eligibility, but definitely gives Alex Bichetta some competition. It'll be interesting who wins the battle there. But I would guess if they wouldn't have brought in Riley Thompson, they didn't think he was capable of being a starting punter, or if they thought Bichetta had it all locked up. So I do remember the few times I saw Bichetta punt. Wasn't exactly anything to write home about. Wasn't bad, but wasn't anything spectacular either. So I'll be intrigued to see how that punter battle plays out too. Marty, you take a look at the transfers so far, and I'm sure we may get a couple more after spring ball because that's when the next transfer period begins. I believe it's sometime in May, runs through mid-June, because the current portal window finished. It started early December and went for about mid-January. So, Marty, what do you think so far of this portal haul, and what, if anything, would you like to see them add in the spring portal window?
Yeah, I mean, first off with Riley Thompson, former freshman All-American, definitely a talented punter. And you mentioned they wouldn't have brought him in if they didn't think he was capable of winning the job. They most certainly wouldn't have brought him in on scholarship and be carrying 2 scholarship punters if there wasn't a lot of confidence there. The other group, I mean, Dante Cephas is the big one to me. If you follow the Twitter tea leaves, that's one it seems like Penn State's been back channeling since about September. Former high school teammate of Penn State Nickelback, Daquan Hardy. Yes, same goes for as anyone who lives around here knows. Anybody in Pittsburgh seemingly is related to Terry Smith in some fashion, or knows him or has a relative. Just somebody's connected to Coach Terry somehow, and Cephas fit that bill also. He really upgrades the wide receiver room. He's wide receiver 1 right now. Penn State went after him hot and heavy the second he entered the portal. It seemed like they thought they were going to get that one wrapped up very quickly. They didn't, due to Cephas not having the credits. Not that I think he'll, just like you say, need to graduate. He need to finish off his degree at Kent State. So he'll do that in the spring, but still announce his commitment to Penn State ahead of time. So like you said, we'll get him in the spring, get him on campus. Excuse me, probably for that summer 1 session. And one thing that's nice with him, though, is a kid who's already played 3 or 4 years of college football, whatever it is. He doesn't need that spring session as much as some other guys would. He's going to have to come in and learn Mike Yursich's passing tree in routes, and that's about it. Other than that, he'll know what he's doing otherwise. Malik McLean already on campus, player I like a lot. You mentioned the Devin Carter saga, whatever you want to call it. It has since come out that when he committed after the Rose Bowl, he committed before he told the staff, and it was just there definitely seemed to be a lot of miscommunication from the start there. He had an official visit scheduled and committed before it, went on the official visit afterwards when things seemed to get hairy. Carter's a good player, don't get me wrong, but I think Malik McLean's a player probably with a higher ceiling. and then Carter, and they both fit that big body, tall receiver they're looking for in the portal. One of my best friends is a Florida State fan. And when I asked him about Malik McClain, he told me he's a good player, fast player. Just when Johnny Wilson absolutely exploded for the Seminoles this year, along with another one of their freshman wide receivers, it just kind of knocked McClain down. It was nothing he did wrong. Florida State just had two absolute studs emerge at receiver. So I think he'll be a nice addition. I mean, McClain has 2 years of eligibility left also, which is nice. And then Storm Duck, I mean, coming into the offseason, cornerback was a sneaky big need for Penn State in the portal. With Joey Porter Jr. off to the draft, yes, you return an elite corner in Kalen King. You return a pretty darn good one opposite him and Johnny Dixon. But on the other side of those two, it gets real thin real fast. So that's riding Storm Duck is big. Duck, 1 year of eligibility left, a grad transfer. I mean, last year he struggled at times. He battled some injuries. And go watch any North Carolina football from last year. They could have had the 85 Bears out there in the field with their defensive coaching staff. I think they would have given up some plays. There's a reason you saw a little bit of mass exodus out of the North Carolina defensive room when the season ended. So I think that'll do Doc a lot of good also, and getting healthy will be big for him. So I think Penn State, with the portal, they've done a nice job at filling holes. Their biggest need entering the offseason was undoubtedly wide receiver. They've added two really good ones in Cephas and in McClain. And, you know, I think the thing with Cephas, too, people need to keep in mind, I mean, the kid put up monster numbers at Kent State, but that was Kent State. Go look what Mitchell Tinsley did at Western Kentucky, right? I think they're totally different receivers because Cephas is definitely more of that speed, take the top off, stretch the field kind of guy than Tinsley was. But I think if you can get similar production out of Cephas that you got out of Tinsley, you're going to be happy with it. Also, because I think Cephas is a guy that's going to demand a little bit more attention from defensive backs than Tinsley did, and that can help free up your Malik McClains, your Keandre Lambert-Smith, Omari Evans, Caden Saunders, whoever it may be.
Well, he was throwing it. I don't know if you saw the viral video, not viral video, but the video in Penn State football's social media of Drew Auer dropping dimes to Caden Saunders. It's like the two of them are developing some chemistry already.
Yeah, which is great to see. But you know, you mentioned the spring section with the portal. I don't know what else Penn State brings in. It's one of the things when you're already being hyped up as a preseason top 5, 6, 7 type team, it can be hard to add portal pieces because it's hard to offer playing time. Like, obviously, if you've got that much offseason hype, it's because you return a lot. They could use a little bit of depth at defensive tackle. Don't know if they're going to find it. I mean, defensive linemen, obviously, every team's always looking for defensive line help. So I mean, I know Penn State pursued a few guys in the portal the first go around in defensive line, but once the school's offered more playing time, they would like to bring in an offensive tackle, I know, as well. But again, you have legitimately the potential number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft, a left tackle, and a right tackle. You're going to have a battle between Drew Shelton, who played to freshman All-American almost kind of levels this year, and Caden Wallace, who has 3 years of starting experience. Again, hard to sell that to a kid. Now, I think if they do add somebody in the trenches after spring ball, if you get a kid who, you know, has like 3 years to play too, something like that, somebody who's younger, similar to when they brought Johnny Dixon at cornerback a few years ago. You know, when they brought Dixon in, he was never brought in to play right away. He was brought in to develop and be in a position to play a big role this past year and this upcoming year. If you could find somebody like that, I think you could see it happen. But otherwise, I think they'd have a hard time adding those positions. Running back's another one right now. You're looking at only having 4 scholarship running backs, 2 of which are true freshmen, and one of which is Montgomery, who we've talked about with his knee issues. So you'd probably like that a running back, but again, going to be hard to do when you might have the best running back duo in the country next year, Singleton and Allen. They're just not going to be touched to go around. If you can find someone who can play a role similar to what Devin Ford played last year before he stepped away from football, you would love that, but that's going to be a lot easier said than done, of course. So I think they're going to continue to pursue positions in the portal. I don't know what, if anything, they'll add. Maybe you look to do something at kicker. I mean, they brought in Alec Felskins from Colgate, but he was not on scholarship. So, you know, maybe if someone enters the portal as a kicker in the spring who you view as a potential scholarship level player, you maybe make a pursuit there just to give him and Sanders Haydak some more competition. But I think with the current makeup of the roster, it's going to be difficult to find portal help, and that to find more portal help, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, when you've got this kind of preseason hype, it's because you have a pretty loaded, pretty deep roster, and you throw in the ways Penn State's already complemented that roster with the portal this offseason, and you just don't have a lot of playing time to go around, and that's not a bad thing. Any coaching staff in the country would much rather build it with their guys that they brought in and developed than have to build it through the portal. So I'm sure James Franklin and staff are perfectly fine with having very low roster turnover and having been able to bring in just those handful of key portal guys to help fill positions.
Absolutely, and it'll be interesting to see who, if any, one they end up adding later on after spring ball. Hey, I guess speaking of which, I know we mentioned Drew Aller dropping dimes to Caden Saunders, and I am curious to see how quickly he develops chemistry with the two transfer receivers. I mean, McLean, I believe, was already enrolled on campus. So
correct, he's already there.
With Cephas, on the other hand, doesn't come in until summertime, but of course he's a seasoned veteran. So hopefully he can grasp the playbook quickly enough, just build that rapport quick enough with Drew. Which, Drew being as talented as he is, I'm hopeful that can be the case.
Yeah, one thing we've talked about a lot with Drew Aller on this show is he's the kind of quarterback where, previewing this offseason and Penn State's needs at wide receiver. And one thing we said was, even if you can't go out and get help through the portal, which of course they did, you like to think Drew Aller is the kind of quarterback that elevates the receivers around him. A comparison I've made, not comparing them as players at all, but just comparing the situations. Look at throughout Tom Brady's career, how often he had a bunch of no-name receivers in New England, how often Aaron Rodgers had a bunch of no-name receivers in Green Bay. Look at Kansas City's current receiver core. Those caliber of quarterbacks elevate the receiver room. Now, I'm not saying Drew Aller is going to be Pat Mahomes or Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. If he is, well, I think we'll all be very happy. But what I'm saying is when you have quarterbacks with that elite skill set, that elite arm ability like Aller has, you expect them to be able to elevate the receiver room. And I think that's where the chemistry thing comes into place also. You expect him to be able to build that chemistry quickly just because he's got the talent on that arm, of put the ball, receiver, go get it and make the play. So I'm hoping that's not an issue. And I don't think it will be, but seeing him with Saunders is definitely encouraging. I think Saunders is a kid. I mean, he came in as a top 50 prospect. You had high expectations from this past year. He didn't contribute. I know there were some comments made by Taylor Stubblefield before he's let go about some of the growing Saunders had to do off the field as well as on the field before he's ready to contribute. So hopefully those strides have been made, and seeing him put in that work with Drew Aller in the offseason definitely gives you
maybe
hope.
A little less ice cream.
Yeah, I knew it was something about eating less ice cream or popcorn or something, but seeing that gives you the optimism that, that growth is being made, and then him and Drew are going to build that rapport, because I think Saunders has a unique skill set that I'm not sure anyone else in the receiver room, Dante Cephas included, necessarily has.
No, and I guess it's a nice little segue into the already insane offseason hype that Penn State's been getting ahead of the 2023 season. Just been looking at look at all these different websites, like CBS 24/7. Well, it's 20% owned by CBS, but ESPN, all the other sites, they all unanimously have Penn State in the top 10. Some even have them in the top 5, like at number 5. And they even mentioned, I think one of them even mentions they were considering putting them in the top 4, which of course, we have the last year of the 14 playoff coming up. So a lot of people are looking at this as a possible playoff team. Obviously, they got to go prove it. They got to manage to at least get a split between Ohio State and Michigan in order to do so. But the hype is there. There's a lot of people believe this team has a capability to get there. And of course, you see that, you watch the video of Drew Aller uh, slinging it around, uh, you know, effortlessly and with power and accuracy, and it's just hard not to. And just knowing who else comes back, obviously with Singleton, Allen at running back, that whole offensive line, the tight end group, and then you think about the defense. You lose a couple guys, but you're returning a bunch of key players too, including Curtis Jacobs, Abdul Carter, Sutton, Disa Isaac, Kalen King. I mean, I can go on. And even more importantly, both coordinators are back. Mike Yursich will be in his third year calling shots on offense, which I do feel the need to point out, Marty. This is the first time ever since James Franklin's been at Penn State, he's had the same offensive coordinator for 3 straight years. Because John Donovan got fired after 2 years. Bill Moorhead left for Mississippi State head coaching job after 2 years. Ricky Ryan did the same thing for Old Dominion after 2 years. Kirk Shiraka, we all know, got fired after just 1 year and then got replaced by Yursich. So I would expect, this, there's no learning a new system, and on top of that, you got a bunch of veterans coming back. So, they know the playbook or the terminology to say like the back of their own hand. So they can easily teach that to the freshmen and the incoming transfer portal players. And then defensively, man, Diaz seems to be staying put for at least another season. So, you're going to be getting that very aggressive, high risk, high rewards, dial up the pressure, almost all the time kind of play. So there's definitely a breath of fresh air seeing a coordinator who actually, in my opinion, utilized, like he knew he had a bunch of athletes there that were capable of getting home if they brings the pressure with them. And sure enough, you saw that. So it's nice to have that again for another year. And then of course special teams, I guess we'll see what happens with that. But it's hard, it's when you think about all of that, it's hard not to be excited for next year, and you can understand why you see them ranked unanimously in the top 10 in all of these, just all these way too early top 25s. So, Marty, where would you say your excitement level is right now? Are you already? Are you one of those types who's like, oh man, it can't be September 2nd soon enough, or are you kind of trying to calm yourself down a bit?
Yeah, it's almost like worrisome that the hype's this high. I feel, I was listening to the college, excuse me, the College Game Day podcast. It was the first episode they did after the national championship game. And Pete Thamel and Reese Davis were doing their like way too early top 4 for next year, like predicting who they were thinking were going to make the playoff, not their preseason top 4, but the 4 teams that make the playoff. And Thamel and Reese Davis both had Penn State in there. And it's just, you hear this stuff. And I think as Penn State fans, we've just been so conditioned to just not expect good things to happen. I mean, you go back to the 99 Minnesota game and basically everything that has unfolded since then in the past 20 some years now. And you expect bad things to happen, but it's hard not to be excited. I honestly don't know the last time I went into an offseason this excited about what was to come for Penn State. The way they performed in the Rose Bowl really was the icing on that cake. In addition to everything else they bring back, to see them finish the season the way they did, with just a dominant performance and a Rose Bowl victory. Yeah, the hype's real. And, you look at next year and there's every reason to believe this team can make the playoff. There's every reason to believe this team can compete for a national championship. On paper, there's no real holes on this team, especially if Drew Allar is who we think Drew Allar is going to be. I can't fault any fan for being over the moon optimistic right now, because I know as the offseason goes on, that's going to be something I'm going to continue to battle, is trying to keep the expectations and the hype and everything in check. Because, it's still It's not even it's Penn State. It's if you're not Alabama, you're not Georgia, you're not Ohio State, you still need to keep your expectations at a certain level entering the season. But yeah, I mean, you look at what they return, you look at what they're bringing in between recruiting and the portal. There aren't, I mean, maybe the biggest hole is like kicker, which you can
If
work
that's your
on.
biggest hole, if
Yeah,
that's the thing that gives you the most concern, then I think you're in
exactly.
a pretty good spot.
Because I mean, you look at the starters, and with adding Cephas and McLean and the way Keandre Lambert-Smith finished the season, I'm really not worried about wide receiver, especially because I think you're going to see young guys emerge there. I mean, there's some like linebacker. If you get an injury or two, I could be worried about the depth. But again, if you're
Not
not
like you
Alabama,
were this
Ohio State,
past year where you were really worried if one or two guys went down. A
exactly, and
little more
if
depth.
you're not again, if you're not Alabama, Ohio State, or Georgia, what team is in a position to absorb two or three injuries at a position? You know what I mean? That goes for any team. You have two or three studs get hurt at a position, you're probably in trouble. So yeah, I am very optimistic. I think this team, I would probably right now, if I had to throw together a way too early top 25 for next year, probably have them about in that 5 to 7 range, which I think everybody will. But you also need to see them prove it on the field until I mean, James Franklin, for the most part, has done pretty well against Michigan. You throw out those first 3 years when they were still battling sanctions. Well, the first two sanctions, that 2016 year where they got rolled. I think he's 500 against Michigan since then. But
Yeah.
Ohio State's really the big elephant in the room. He's only beaten the Buckeyes once. He's been in position to beat them more than once. I mean, honestly, you could make the argument that they should have won in 17. They should have won in 18. They should have won against them this year. So until they get over that hump on the field, it's okay to be hesitant. It's okay to kind of have your reservations about it. But yeah, this team is talent wise is capable of winning a national championship. I truly believe that.
And the schedule, what also makes me bullish about this upcoming season is the schedule is favorable. I mean, you open at home with West Virginia, and that's a team that's, frankly, their head coach is lucky he still has his job. I believe they were in the middle. They hadn't hired a new athletic director at the time. They didn't want to end up getting rid of a coach. Have to make a coaching change for their biggest cash cow while they were still figuring out the AD position. But Neil Brown goes into his fifth season there in the hot seat, and his reward is getting to open up on the road against a preseason top 10 Penn State team. So good luck with that. And then you get Delaware at home the following week, and then you open Big Ten play on the road again, which is annoying, but it is at Illinois. And yes, I know people are gonna say, well, we lost to Illinois last time. Yes, that's also why I think they're gonna beat them and perhaps beat them rather handily because there's still a lot of guys in the team that were around for that game against Illinois, and I'm sure they will have nothing more than to take it out on them and erase those horrible memories. And Illinois, they lost their stud running back Chase Brown to the NFL, and while I certainly Bielema is a fine coach, he's done a good job developing the kids he's had there so far, and by all means, it seems like he's recruiting at Illinois is on the up and up, but that's going to be a tall task for them to try and shut down this Penn State offense. And on the flip side, I mean, I think the defense will. I mean, I'll tell you that Michigan game aside, what Manny definitely he's done a good job at keeping opposing running backs from running too wild on his team, on his defense. So I just think about how they kept Mo Ibrahim in check for Minnesota the following week after Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum ran all over them the week before at Michigan. So I'm hopeful that even if Illinois does find a quality replacement for Chase Brown, they won't just be able to run for like 300 plus yards like they did a couple years ago. And then you get Iowa at home, which potential whiteout game maybe. We'll see. I don't know if with the new Big Ten media deal, if that old rule about November night games is still intact, where both teams have to agree to it. Because if not, then maybe that Michigan game in November is a night game. But get out at home revenge game, which frankly, I mean, you got to think that the team's got that circled on the calendar. Coaching staff does for sure. After the way they were getting booed after every injury that happened. Because the fans were accusing them of faking injuries, and seems to be some bad blood from that game. So I would imagine, that should be a big revenge factor in there. And then finish off September with a road trip to Northwestern, who, while they certainly can't be any worse than last year, it's hard to see how they're going to be that much better. And then the best part is you get a bye week before you play UMass at home for your first October game. And it's a nice little glorified scrimmage before you got to go to Columbus the following week to play Ohio State. So it sets up nicely in that they don't have, some really tough opponent they got to take down before they get to Ohio State. Frankly, if it would be a bitter disappointment if they're not undefeated going into Columbus. Ask me, the two games that are on the schedule that are iffy to me are Ohio State and Michigan. Just because. Everything else, Penn State should be a clear favorite in all the other 10 games. But the schedule just sets up nicely going into the Ohio State game. And even after that, you play Indiana at home and then you go on the road to Maryland. They could be, you never know, they could be feisty, but still, it's not a team I'm super concerned about. So you get those two in between Ohio State and playing Michigan, which will be at home this year in Happy Valley. And if they've relaxed the rules on Big Ten night games, then maybe that's going to be the whiteout game. So see about that. Then you finish with Rutgers and then on the road at Michigan State, which, I guess maybe that could potentially be tricky if Mel Tucker strikes it rich in the portal again. Or it could be another walk in the park if he, if it ends up being anything like last year. So it's not just who they have coming back, but also just the way the schedule sets up. It's rather favorable, if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree. 100% agree that if you don't go into that Ohio State game undefeated, you're probably that's a letdown. It really is. And you mentioned UMass the week before. UMass is also the week after Penn State bye. And if the patented James Franklin post bye week struggles continue this season, I'll just give up any hope of that problem ever being fixed. But no, in all seriousness, like you said, the schedule's favorable. Your crossover games, obviously Iowa's going to be tough. They're Iowa. They always are, but you get them at home. And I saw Kirk Ferentz said today they don't plan on making any changes to their offensive coaching staff. So, that benefits the rest of the Big Ten a lot more than benefits Iowa. So, and then he said Illinois, Chase Brown was the heart and soul of that team. He's gone. And Northwestern, again, as you said, can you really expect Wildcats to improve that much in one offseason? Probably not. One point you made, though, that I am very intrigued by is with this new TV deal are the November night games. Because if that's going to change, I guarantee you Michigan's going to be the whiteout. I think Iowa could be a night game regardless because Penn State always wants to get two night games on that home schedule.
NBC will be salivating for its new primetime Big Ten.
Yes.
To get a game.
Yeah. That's why I think that's a night game regardless. It's just a matter, is it the whiteout or is it maybe like a stripe out and not Michigan's the whiteout? But like every other year for Penn State, like every other year for pretty much every team in the Big Ten, especially in the Big Ten East, it's going to come down to the big two. It's going to come down to what you do against the Wolverines. It's going to come down to what you do against the Buckeyes. You take care of business in those games, even one of those two games, you're probably going to get to where you want to be at the end of the year. If you don't, if you continue to come up short, you're going to continue to come up short of your goals. I mean, I realize this is really simplifying things, but I think it can be really simple. James Franklin has beaten Ohio State once. James Franklin has won the Big Ten once. Those things happen in the same season. I don't think that's a coincidence. You know, it is the Big Ten runs through Ohio State. I know Michigan's won the conference the last 2 years, but you still need to beat the Buckeye. If you're Penn State, you still need to get over that Buckeye hump because, like I said, they've gotten over the Michigan hump a decent amount under James Franklin outside of those first 3 years. You've got to start getting over that Ohio State hump more. And if they can do that this year, they're going to put themselves in a position to make a run for both the Big Ten championship and potentially beyond.
Absolutely. Before we get into our last topic, just want to thank all you who have tuned in, whether you're on the main Voice of College Football channel or on the Penn State Voice of College Football channel. That being said, if you like what you've seen or if you've watched before and maybe you've enjoyed it, you've just forgotten to, please like and subscribe to our Penn State Voice of College Football channel. That's a channel that Mark and us are working on trying to grow. Last I checked, we're at 564 subscribers. So if we can get us up to 600 by the time we hit spring ball, that would be swell. And also blockyourdiaries.com. Where Marty and I write for. Right now, obviously, football season may not be going on, except we do have some nice recruiting coverage. I think Marty, you and Patrick Kerbler, and have been putting together some nice recruiting profiles on the 23 class. So go check those out. And also, given that we're in the thick of basketball season, wrestling season, hockey season, we've got coverage for that. And since Marty and I are basketball writers for blackstrays.com, and since Penn State is having one of those rare seasons where they're in the thick of the NCAA tournament hunt, let's talk a little hoops, Marty. Obviously, tonight did not go Penn State's way, but that's to be expected because they were playing at number one ranked Purdue, whose team that's literally only lost once this season. And that's in large part because they have a human cheat code in 7'4" center Zach Edey, who once again had himself a double-double, 18 points, 13 boards. But really, it was a guy off the bench for Purdue, Mason Gillis, a guy who hadn't really done much in terms of three-point shooting. But he had made 7 threes in his career. But tonight, he goes a whopping 9 for 12 from downtown, finishes with career-high 29 points. I guess it's probably the most Penn State basketball thing ever to have a guy off the bench just torch you for 29 points. But at the same time, no one was really expecting Penn State to go into Mackey Arena and get the dub tonight. Really, it's what happens after tonight that's going to determine whether they get in or not. And you and I were talking about this in the Slack channel, but currently they sit at 5-6 in conference play. But you look at what they have coming up. There's a road trip to Nebraska on Sunday. And yes, winning the Big Ten on the road is always tough. Doesn't matter how good or bad the opponent is. And Penn State has been very Jekyll and Hyde shooting the rock. They're very good shooting it at home this year, but on the road it's been very shaky. The win at Illinois aside. So if they're bricking shots, even that Nebraska game could be a struggle. Although the Huskers seem to be missing a couple key players due to injury and have been playing rather shorthanded. So even if they do struggle, you would think Penn State's just sheer depth advantage should win out. And then you get a revenge game of Wisconsin a week from today at home, which that's a game, frankly, they should have won at the Kohl Center. They had a 6-point lead at halftime and just kind of blew it, but also got some really unfavorable calls from the refs in the final minutes, which screwed them over, frankly. But you look at the rest of the schedule, and I see I have Ken Palm open. They currently have Penn State ranked 46, and Ken Palm is projecting Penn State goes 10-10 in conference play, 19-12 overall, which, in my opinion, it probably has them on the right side of the bubble, but in that scenario, I would want to see them win at least a game in the Big Ten tournament to feel comfortable with their chances. Like, I personally think 20 overall wins, 11 Big Ten wins is the magic number. Doesn't really matter how they get to it, who they beat to get to it, but because the Big Ten is a highly respected conference. But I feel like, yeah, you get to 20 wins overall. I think that puts them in. You get beyond that, like 21 wins, for example. I think that, I mean, that not only makes them a lock, but I think it gets them to avoid playing in Dayton for the first four. Because right now, the way things are going, I kind of get that feeling they're gonna get in, but they'll end up having to play in the play-in game in Dayton.
Yeah, I agree. I think 19 regular season wins probably gets them there. 19 with a win or two in the Big Ten tournament definitely gets them there. If they can get to 20 in the regular season, which I think is very doable, I definitely think they're golden. And probably avoid Dayton, which is the big thing. Like, it would be so Penn State basketball. I mean, I realize there probably aren't a ton of Penn State basketball people out there who follow this program the way you and I do. But it would be so Penn State basketball if the last two times they had a tournament level team, one year the team gets its season ended early due to a global pandemic, and the other year they get stuck having to go to Dayton only to lose in the play-in round.
I mean, but they would be in the NCAA tournament in that case.
Oh yeah, but it's just, to me, as a baseball guy, to make it a baseball comparison, to me, as a fan of the Pittsburgh Pirates, who 3 years in a row technically made the playoffs by making the wild card play-in game, but losing two of those 2 years they lost, it didn't really feel like they made the playoffs. It's similar to that to me.
Okay, I can see your point.
But I think if they get to 20 in the regular season, I think they're in the field of 64 comfortably and avoid Dayton altogether. And I think that's doable. Like, so you look at the remaining schedule, I think there's no reason they can't go 6-3. I think what's very important, and this is something, Tim, you and I have talked about a ton in the Slack channel as well, they don't have any bad losses this year. The two big ones to me on this schedule, maybe the biggest games left to make sure they don't have bad losses, are going to be, that trip to Nebraska and that game against Minnesota. Yep. You cannot afford any bad losses if you're Penn State. And if you take care of business against Nebraska, you take care of business against Minnesota, you're not going to have any bad losses at the end of the year, no matter what happens in those other 7 games. So I think if you win those 2 and can get 4 other wins on top of them, which is very doable, I think this team's safe. I think they're in. And I think one thing that would help too is if they can take care of business and get 6-3 the rest of the way, you're going to add some more quality wins. You've got Illinois again. If you can take down the Illini twice, have a season sweep of them, which, I mean, you went on the road and beat them. There's no reason you can't beat them at the Bryce Jordan Center. You mentioned that Wisconsin game. I feel very confident Micah Shrewsbury and this team is going to come out hot and angry when the Badgers come to town after what happened up in Madison a few weeks ago. I still cannot get over that offensive foul call late in that game. Just brutal.
That was just
brutal call.
Infuriating.
If they don't call that, I think there's a real scenario Penn State wins that game. But the Kohl Center curse lives on forever, I suppose.
If Jalen Pickett were wearing a Michigan State or Purdue jersey,
yes, it was the jersey he had on.
Would have been a foul on Wisconsin.
Absolutely. I mean, what game was? I think it might even been after that game when Micah Shrewsbury came out and said, "Oh, there's been time this year officials haven't even known his name." It's just awful. Those kinds of things can't happen. Yeah, but like I said, I think this team going 6-3 the rest of the way is very doable. If they can do that while making sure neither of those 3 losses are Nebraska or Minnesota, I think they're in good shape regardless of what happens in the Big Ten tournament. Now, if they get the 20 regular season wins and win a game or 2 in the Big Ten tournament, I definitely think they're comfortably in with nothing to sweat out come Selection Sunday. But, I mean, hey, as a Penn State basketball fan, we don't get very many seasons like this. And the last one we did get, again, ended by a global pandemic. It's been, over 10 years since they made the NCAA tournament last.
12 years.
I knew it had been over 10 because I remember I was around my senior year, freshman year of college, somewhere in that window. But, yeah, it's just fun to be in this position right now as a Penn State basketball fan. It's been a really fun season. Yeah, so just hopefully it ends. Even if they get there and they lose in the first round, it'll be fun to get there. It'll be big for the program to get there. So hopefully they'll finish this thing strong here over the course of this last month, and we'll be talking about Penn State basketball going dancing come March.
Yeah, and I hope to be able to finally attend a Penn State March Madness game of my bucket list. It's like I intended to do 3 years ago before COVID had other plans. But yeah, you do mention, the two of the games they really cannot lose being Nebraska and Minnesota on the road. I'm looking at the NCAA net rankings, and so Nebraska, they're around 98, 99. So that would actually, so you look at it would actually be a quad 2 road game. So obviously you want them to win just because that's one of their better chances to get a win on schedule, according to KenPom. But a loss it would not be considered like a bad, like say losing to Minnesota, for example. That's, they're ranked 221st in net rankings. And even though it's on the road, that's still, you're talking about a quad 3 road game. So that's definitely cannot lose. That would be a bad loss. And that's part of what's keeping Penn State squarely on the bubble is they don't have a single bad loss. So, out of those 2 games, you definitely got to win Minnesota at least. But I would hope they can beat a shorthanded Nebraska team without too much trouble. So, but hopefully they shoot the ball well enough to, make us not as sweat out in that one. And Wisconsin, I mean, that could be a borderline. That's like borderline quad 3 home games. So obviously they need to hold serve at home. That seems to be the path to make the tournament. Hold serve at home, get a win or 2 on the road. So, Wisconsin, and that's a team that may be a quad 3 home game by the time we get the Badgers because they've been free falling in the standings of the Big Ten. And of course, like I said, I would think Penn State's going to come out pissed, kind of like they did against Michigan, and just light them up. So we'll see how that one plays out. Now, the home game I'm probably most worried about is Illinois because, frankly, they'll be looking for revenge after what Penn State did to them in their house. But, man, if they can beat them again, get that sweep, that is huge for the resume. They're currently 24th in net, so that's a quad 1 home game, the rare quad 1 home game. So they beat them, they get themselves another big resume booster there, and I'll be at the road game at Maryland, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. So not expecting a win there because Maryland's been pretty tough at home too, just like Penn State has, but they can pull that off. That's another so huge win. Same thing with Ohio State. Even though Ohio State's kind of near the bottom of the Big Ten standings, they get a lot of respect in KenPom and in the net. So that's another quad 1 road game. So there's going to be some opportunities here down the stretch here for Penn State to notch some quad 1 wins, which, could really help them come, Selection Sunday. But yeah, it's going to be, I mentioned this I do a bracket watch post usually about once a week. And I mentioned in one of the previous ones to just strap in because it's going to be a bumpy bubble ride. And that's exactly what it's been so far. And I don't anticipate anything different in the month of February, but it is a more manageable slate than it was in the January gauntlets. I remember saying if they could just get for the January still at 500 in the Big Ten, they would be on pace to give themselves a good chance to make the dance. And sure enough, they were 500 coming in tonight. So we'll see how things shake out. It's an exciting time, though, for sure. This doesn't happen too often for us long-suffering Penn State Hoops fans. So I would love to see Jalen Pickett and those shooters. They have potential to make a bit of a run in the tournament if they can get in. So be exciting to see. Anyway, I think we've been yapping on here long enough for you folks. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. We'll be back sometime in the spring to preview the blue white game, talk about spring practice. Or you know what? Maybe we'll even come and do an all hoops show or something. If Penn State's still in the hunt come March. So once again for Marty, Tim, thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you soon.